Welcome to Economics 231, Macroeconomics. This is Chapter 20, Appendix A. I am Dr. Yohe, and this is the self-correcting aggregate demand and supply model. Now, one of the reasons we're doing this model is because the Keynesian model had some serious problems. One of them was it could not explain something that went on during the 1970s, where we had a period of what we'll call stagflation. Stagflation is where the economy's in a recession, so output is down below full employment, but rising prices. If you remember the old Keynesian model, the backward shaped L, it said prices could go up, but output would stay constant. That was the boom. Or you could have a recession where output declined, but prices didn't change. In the 1970s, we had a period where we had a recession, but prices were going up. And this was something that the Keynesian model, the old school Keynesian model, said was impossible. If prices are going up, you're at full employment. If output's going down, prices are staying level. So instead of scrapping the whole thing, they developed a new set of curves, and we're going to add a curve. Okay, and they're going to change the assumptions. Okay, so we're going to add a new curve, and that's something called a short-run aggregate supply curve. Now, the short-run aggregate supply curve is a curve that shows the level of real GDP produced at different possible price levels during a period of time in which nominal incomes do not change in response to changes in the price level. So there's a number of ways of looking at this, and one of them is prices change but wages don't. Prices adjust instantly, but wages are sticky. Okay, so this short-run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, and that's because wages are sticky. So prices can change with changes in aggregate demand or whatever. So aggregate demand increases, prices go up, but wages stay sticky. So if prices go up, your costs stay, your marginal costs stay the same, or excuse me, your wages stay the same. That's going to increase profits, and that's going to make it more profitable to produce output. So if prices go up in the short run, output will expand. If prices go down, output will decline or contract. But prices are only sticky. They change over time. So over time, I'm trying to get this so you can see it, over time prices might go up, but wages start and eventually catch up to them. And when they catch up to them, that brings us back to the long-run equilibrium, which we'll talk about. So here's that short-run aggregate supply curve. You can see here at low price levels, very little real output is produced. As prices go up, price levels go up. On the right-hand side, output starts to increase. And that's why we've got this upward sloping curve. Once again, real GDP is on the y-axis, and the price level is on, price level is on the y-axis, and here they're measuring it with the CPI. And real GDP is on the x-axis. Okay. You can see here that as prices go up from, say, 100 to 150, that causes us to move up this short-run aggregate supply curve initially. And that will cause output to expand, and in this case, it'll expand above full employment. If prices decrease, that will cause us to move down the curve, and you can see that output will decrease. We also have a long-run aggregate supply curve, and this long-run aggregate supply curve is the same one in your book you would have seen in the classical model. It is a vertical line straight up and down. This curve shows that the level of real GDP produced at different possible price levels during a period in which nominal incomes or wages change by the same percentage as the price level changes, and we'll find out that that stays at that full employment level of output. So if we look at the graph here, here's an explanation of it. We'll look at the picture on the next slide. You can see here in the long run, sufficient time has elapsed for labor contracts to expire and wages and salaries to be renegotiated and catch up with the price level. So it is a vertical line set here at full employment. And then short run aggregate supply will be upward sloping, intersecting only here where the price level is 100 and full employment is achieved in the economy. Here, changes in price changes in aggregate demand will only cause changes in price, no real change in output. So here, prices went up by 50%. Initially, on that short run aggregate supply curve, that would cause us to operate out here, right? Because it goes horizontally here. We may be out here at some point C. So we go from A to C in the short run. But in the long run, as wages start to catch up with prices, that will bring us back here to point B, where prices went up by 50%, wages went up by 50%, profitability is unchanged in the long run, and output will stay here at that full employment level of output. Equilibrium in this self-correcting aggregate demand aggregate supply model in the long run is where the aggregate demand curve intersects both the vertical long run aggregate supply, the LRAS, the vertical line that goes straight up, and that short run aggregate supply curve. So they'll all intersect each other at one point, and that's here. Whenever we work in these models, we always start off from some long run equilibrium. The CPI, this price level, is 100. It's whatever it is at the given point in time. Okay? You can see short run aggregate supply, upward sloping, crosses this long run aggregate supply at that sweet spot where we got full employment and no price inflation. Remember, price inflation, anything over 100, prices are going up or have gone up above the base level or the regular level here. Anything below 100, prices are going down or have gone down. They've decreased. So right here is the sweet spot. All three curves intersect here. We always start off from this point when we use these models, and then we'll shift one of the curves and see what happens. So an increase in aggregate demand. If you remember from before in the Keynesian model, in the last video, all that caused was price inflation. Okay, we had our long run. We don't even have a long run. We have our aggregate supply curve, which is that backward shaped L, and we get an increase in aggregate demand. All that's going to do and I'll bring it down here. All that's going to do is, here's our initial equilibrium here at point A. We start off here. We get some increase in aggregate demand. Maybe government spending increases or animal spirits increase, and we get an increase in aggregate demand. All that will do is move us up here to point B. Prices increase, but output stays here at our full employment level of output. So price level might go up from a price level 100 up here to 120, but output stays the same. Okay. Now, with this long run aggregate supply curve, it will eventually shift leftward as nominal incomes rise because firms are competing for labor when the economy operates beyond full employment. So we'll get here, over time, the economy self-corrects. So what we're going to see here is, there's my curve, okay. We get this increase in aggregate demand. And that's going to be up here on the PowerPoints. We're back to the PowerPoints now. Okay, so we get some increase in aggregate demand. Animal spirits are high. We get decreasing interest rates in the economy. We get better exchange rates. The dollar is cheaper relative to other currencies, so we send a lot of exports out and don't buy as many imports, whatever the reason. aggregate demand increases from AD1 to AD2. That causes us to move up the short run aggregate supply curve, this horizontal curve, and that brings us to E2. E2 you can think of as a short run equilibrium. Where all three curves cross at the same time, that's a long run equilibrium. As prices go up, but wages stay the same, it becomes more profitable to produce output. So firms will increase output and hire more labor, and unemployment will actually go down below full employment, and the economy's output will increase above the full employment level of output. But over time, wages will catch up. As wages increase, the short run aggregate supply curve decreases. That makes it less profitable here than there to produce output. So firms will start to cut back on output. They'll release some workers back into the workforce, but employment is still below full unemployment level. We may have 3% here and 4% here. We'll get back to 5.1 or whatever when we get all the way back here. But as wages rise, that decreases the short run aggregate supply curve until finally we return to a new long run equilibrium where aggregate demand, short run, and long run aggregate supply all intersect at the same point. So the economy goes from E1, a long run equilibrium, we get a change in aggregate demand. The economy goes to E2. As wages start to go up and start catching up with increasing prices, that causes this short run aggregate supply curve to keep decreasing and shifting and moving us along the aggregate demand curve until we get back to the long run aggregate supply curve. Then the economy's back in a new long run equilibrium. Prices are now at 200 in this example, and we're back to our full employment level of output. A decrease in aggregate demand will cause a recession. That was a boom. Let me go back here. I forgot to talk about that. Here you can see we have rising prices, but at the same time, we've got a booming economy. The economy is really, you can almost think of it as kind of too hot, okay? It can't stay there. It's going to cool off, okay? It cools off as wages and factor prices start increasing. That starts shifting this short-run aggregate supply curve back to the left. That brings us along this aggregate demand curve in a bunch of different little short-run equilibrium until we get to this long-run equilibrium E4. So that whole time, prices are rising, output initially increases a lot, then starts to decrease, but it's always above full employment, and we eventually stop when we get back to full employment. So it's a temporary boom with increasing prices that persist into the long run. Okay, here the opposite occurs. We get a decrease in aggregate demand, and our short-run aggregate supply curve shifts rightward as nominal incomes fall because unemployed workers are competing for jobs when the economy operates below full employment. So here, prices drop initially. That causes the recession in this model. And as wages start to decrease, that starts to shift the curve to the right, and that brings us back to long-run full employment equilibrium output. So over time, the economy self-corrects to a lower price level at full employment real GDP. So here, we've got our initial long-run equilibrium. That's that economy that was in the boom, went back. Now we got a price level of 200 here, and we're at full employment output. Something comes along, we get some negative animal spirits. Ruff, ruff, meow, meow. That's a squirrel animal spirit. Okay, and that decreases aggregate demand. Now we get a movement from E1 to E2. As we move from E1 to E2, you'll notice that prices are falling and output is decreasing. So we're in a recession and prices are falling. As prices keep falling, wages start to catch up. Wages start to fall. And as wages start to fall, that shifts the short-run aggregate supply curve to the right. We're increasing short-run aggregate supply. And that causes these new little short-run equilibrium to start moving back down the aggregate demand curve from E2 to E3. As we move down, prices continue to drop during this recovery. We're calling it a recovery. Okay. And eventually, prices or wages catch up to prices, fall enough that we return back to the long-run equilibrium here at E4. So we move from E1, prices and output decrease at the same time we get to E2. Then, during the recovery part of this recession, as wages start to decrease and follow prices, prices decrease, wages are decreasing with it, output is expanding. This makes it more profitable to produce output at E3 than E2 because wages are lower and prices are dropping, but wages are dropping faster. And eventually that brings us back to that new long-run equilibrium E4. So E1, E2, E3, E4. Here, output is below full employment, so the economy is in a recession, and then recovers, bringing us back to full employment and a new lower long-run price level. And output's back here again at full employment. So our conclusion is here, a rightward shift in the long-run aggregate supply curve represents economic growth in potential full employment real GDP. Now, the long-run aggregate supply curve, think of that as what we call secular changes in output. These are changes caused by changes in the quantity and or quality of the real factors of production. So we could get more labor, we could get better labor through education and training. That would increase the long-run aggregate supply curve. We've got a problem coming up. We've got a lot of people retiring. I saw an article today. And the number of people leaving the workforce once they get to be 65 is going to be greater than the number of people entering the workforce. These are, say, high school and junior high school students turning 16. As these older workers leave faster than new workers enter the economy, we're losing experience and labor manpower. That will cause a decrease in long-run aggregate supply, all other things being equal in the economy, which we're not saying they will be. Okay, advance in technology, that is also a resource or factor of production. Okay, so here we have an economy from 2005 to 2015, and you can see here as long-run aggregate supply increases, these short-run aggregate supply and aggregate demand curves change with it. And over time, according to this graph, we would get rising price levels and increased levels of real GDP, if you buy that story. Okay, this is after the dot-com boom bubble. 1985, the economy is below its full employment potential. Over 5 years, the economy grew to full employment with mild inflation. Technological change and capital accumulation caused economic growth and potential real GDP. So as capital accumulation and technology increased, that pushed this curve out, even though back in 1995, the economy might have been down here below its potential GDP. That's the trend line, which is just a collection of those different long-run equilibrium. So a rightward shift of the aggregate supply curve will cause increases in price level and real GDP. Nominal incomes rise. Short-run aggregate supply shifts leftward, and long-run equilibrium is restored. Okay, so you can see here, this was our long-run equilibrium. We get a rightward shift, an increase in the long-run long-run supply curve for the economy, long run aggregate supply curve. Ignore this C up here, it should be an S. And as that happens, that causes a disequilibrium in the economy, or let's go from a long run to a short run. So in 1995, here, output is below full employment GDP, and aggregate demand is here. So we're operating at a price level below where the economy would be in a long run equilibrium. In 2000, aggregate demand increases. That brought us above full employment, rising prices. As wages start to catch up with this increased demand, that brings us back to this long run aggregate supply curve. That should be S, long run aggregate supply, in 2000, where outputs increased, but so have prices. And that's real growth in the economy if we were to buy this model as being accurate. Thank you very much. Have a great day. I got this one under 20, 25 minutes, 21 minutes. Short quiz at the end. Thank you. Bye.